Okay. So we are live here on LinkedIn, and I have your stuff. So we'll start off. Welcome, everyone, to Accelerator Insider. I'm Dominique Aubrey Morgan, your host, and we are talking with Accelerator MDs about what they've built and how they support building businesses of the future, and their thoughts on innovation more broadly. So I'm really excited to have Kerry Bowie here today, who's the Executive Director of the Majira Project. So hi, Kerry.
Hey, Dominique.
So I've worked with Kerry for many, many years. So this will be a really fun conversation. I'm really excited about talking about what you've been working on. Really, I mean, more broadly across the ecosystem and specifically with Majira as well. Folks can go onto your LinkedIn and like learn all about you, and they can, Google the site. So I don't want to kind of spend too much time on things that they can easily find. But I love to maybe just start with some grounding around Majira, and to maybe just start with, what does Majira stand for? And then how did you come across that name?
Yeah, so Majira is Swahili for summer, and what it means or how we use the name is in a nod to the growing season. And so thinking about in an agricultural context, a seed or a seedling needs sunlight, it needs water, it needs nutrients, it needs a pot to be potted in. And so as we were working with startups and small businesses, we thought that they needed, in a sense, the same thing. So entrepreneurs and startups, our theory of change for the Majira project is around consulting, coaching, connections, and capital. And so if we think we give those things to these entrepreneurs and startups, that's where it comes from. And Majira, really, comes from out of my consulting practice. And
Mhm.
so I have a consulting practice called Masada Partners, and Masada is Swahili for service. I specifically wanted it to be have sort of an ethnic piece
Mhm.
to it and sort of say that because oftentimes in this space it's working with people of color. There's this thing that it's the sort of great white hope coming in and helping to fix things, and wanting to
Mhm.
say, hey, we're people of color as well, and we have we're competent, we have contextual background and sort of the wherewithal to support these companies as well.
And so, kind of to your point of kind of what you're building, it's a particular name, and actually your whole ecosystem is kind of all based on these Swahili words. So, like, were you reading a book one day? Like, did you, like, how did you come across like this idea and then the theme across all three actually?
Yeah, so and I think part of the consulting piece was really wanting to help, and like I said, that service piece, it just fit. And so actually my Nigerian friends get on me about, I was just meeting with one in DC, and he said, why not something from the Igbo or that space. And I just I got into, once I did Masada, it flowed. And actually, there's a vendor that we just launched as well, and it actually has an M as well. So it's Masada Partners, is a consulting practice. The Majura Project is the nonprofit industry, agnostic accelerator that we're here to talk about mostly today. But from that, we've also recently launched a VC fund called Maleka Ventures, and Maleka is Swahili for angel. And the reason we called it angel is, I think a lot of the venture has left venture capital, and so we want to make sure we're talking about we're a VC fund and firm, but acting a little bit more like angels to a certain extent, of wanting to come really early, but also to spend a little bit more time and be more involved with these founders. Oftentimes, because of this accelerator component, we've had time to
Mhm.
get to know the funders through working with them through multiple accelerators, including the Majira project.
And so for everyone who's looking for some alliteration words, Swahili is where you go because you were able to find all three of those with an M, right? And so for those who love alliteration, that's perfect. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, you talked about kind of what each one does. How do you see this kind of triad that you've really built around services and supports? Kind of how do you see this all for you as part of the same whole in terms of your activity and kind of your purpose?
Yeah, and I, I stumbled across it, and I think, I know we're both involved with, like, the NSF, National Science Foundation I-Corps program,
Mhm,
through the MIT node up here, and
mhm,
a lot of that is about customer discovery. So I think a lot of what I've done over the last 7 years is really, just listen to what people have said, and so. I wasn't planning to start a nonprofit. I actually, I love nonprofits, but I actually think there are oftentimes too many of them, and we probably need more M&A in the space, and
mhm,
mergers and acquisitions. But God has a funny sense of humor, so now I'm running two nonprofits.
yeah,
But part of it was, could we do this in a for-profit way?
mhm,
Partly, Masada came out of, I was working for Governor Patrick here in Massachusetts, and Governor Baker, doing environmental work. My background's in environmental engineering, and doing global, climate change, greenhouse gases, all that stuff. As I spoke to people in those spaces, they were saying, "Hey, we need jobs. We need better education, affordable transportation, affordable housing, all of that." And right around that time, 20 that was sort of 2015, the Federal Reserve Bank here in Boston put out a report called the Color of Wealth. And there are two big stats that always stick out to me. It said the average net worth of a white family in Boston was
mhm,
$247,500, so pretty much a quarter of $1 million, and the average net worth of a black family was $8. And so we had the largest wealth gap in the country at the time. And I said, "Hey, I've got an MBA. I've worked in private sector. You know what? Let me jump out and do that." And I've been doing stuff through MIT's venture mentoring service. I've been mentoring a lot of people, and also not seeing a lot of people who look like me. So I was mentoring young white students and Asian students at MIT, and I'm going, "Hey, I love to, work with some people who look like me." And so that's what I did. I jumped out. I said, I led with my heart, not my head. So unfortunately, I had a hobby for a couple years. Good
yeah,
thing my wife is a physician scientist and was making a lot of money, and could, carry me for a couple years while I figured this out. And that's sort of what we did, is we took this consulting practice. Well, and that's sort of, how the Majira project started. That's a, we'll get into that story, but my plan initially was to, have people pay consulting fees, but they couldn't do that.
mhm,
Early stage startups, small businesses, they're grinding. They're just trying to make things happen. And so they couldn't, afford me, the six-figure salary I was used to doing. But they are oftentimes the people who need the most support and assistance.
yeah, no, I mean 100%. And I know there's some folks watching, so feel free to drop in your questions as we go, as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about, to your point, Majira. And, I mean, I met you about 7 years ago, at the CIC. And I remember, Masada, you were doing Masada. I think it was Majira's like first cohort really at that time. And it's really grown and evolved. But I'd love to understand a little bit more about like the initial kind of conception of the idea. So Madeira looks a lot different than other accelerator programs, and it might not even be the right terminology to call it an accelerator. I mean, maybe it does do some acceleration. Maybe it's more a little bit of strategic support. Maybe it's incubation. But really, a lot of that came from your relationship with BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and so want to just hear from you about how you came up with the concept, and then what like kind of what led to this particular manifestation of the idea with BCG.
Yeah, and so actually, and it wasn't even BCG first. It was just, me talking to different folks, and I talked to one of my friends and classmates. So like I said, I went to MIT undergrad, but I went to University of Michigan for grad school,
Mhm,
and then I came back after working in semiconductor. I worked. Did Sloan. And so
mhm,
one of my classmates from Sloan actually did undergrad at Michigan. And so we've kept in touch, and, watching football games or basketball games and different things. And so I was actually at his house, watching a game. And I told him just what I told you. I love to work with these companies, but we don't have the bandwidth. They can't pay us. And so, like, it's not sustainable.
Mm,
And he pretty much said, "Hey, we'd love to help." And by we, I was talking to an individual, but at the time he was a managing director and partner at the Boston Consulting Group. And
mhm,
so, it came out of that. He said, "Hey, we love to do that." And his name's Roger
mhm,
Primo. Roger is no longer at BCG. He's
mhm,
actually the, I think, general manager of corporate strategy at IBM. But he's stayed on as the vice president
mhm,
of the board. But we said, let's do it. And so in 2016, after that conversation, we did a pilot with 6 companies, for them to do pretty much, pro bono consulting. Our,
mhm,
our sort of idea was, from a corporate stewardship or citizen perspective, a lot of companies you will do, um, walk for hunger.
mhm,
That's great. Habitat for Humanity, that's great. But it was this whole idea of skills based volunteering. Why not do what you do really well? You do strategy and sales and marketing and operations projects. Why not do that for someone who will probably never be, one of your clients? And I've never done a formal BCG engagement, but I'm assuming these are like $1 million plus, engagements in some cases for some of the big Fortune 100, 500 companies. So at the very beginning, when we started this, we were talking about wanting to help manifest and support, a number of companies just to get to like 2 million, in, ARR.
mhm,
Because here in Boston, I didn't see that. Outside of some of the construction firms, I couldn't name half a dozen companies led by Black and brown people who were doing more than, 2 million ARR. And so that was the initial concept. So we've grown since then. And so some
mhm,
of our companies now can afford BCG engagements, especially coming out of it. And they're doing more than 2 million, some of them before they come in. And so
mhm.
it is definitely different in that sense that it's not super early stage. We're going a little bit later because we think that's also necessary.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think back, and I don't, have the hard stats on this, but I kind of want to say I think you were one of the early organizations that did this partnership. I mean, now you see McKinsey doing it, we see Accenture doing it, right? But I think so much of that for the last 7 years has been really you and BCG, and even inspiring BCG to take that idea and then evolve it as well into some of their own additional programming. But I don't. It wasn't really a thing, a couple of years ago. I mean, normally it was like we'd have mentors that would come to other programs from these companies, but not really this integrated approach of leveraging the pro bono. We saw it maybe a little bit in legal, I think, but not really in consulting. So I think you probably did spearhead something without knowing it on that day, with BCG, as well. And there's some other things, I want to talk a little bit about the stage of company because I think that's also super unique and some of the services because the one thing that I love about Majira uniquely, and I work with a lot of accelerators and see a lot around the country, is that most are focused on pre-seed, which is important. Ideation, validation, kind of getting the first MVP out the door, getting to $100,000, like all these things are super important in the business building process. But there's really nothing, once you've kind of maybe raised a little bit of money or maybe you've hit $1 million in revenue or more, there's very little resource because, and I think it's because they're seeing that's more competition right now. You're like actually kind of out here with some of the big guys, and it's like, oh, in startup land, and they're like, wait a minute, we don't want to service them too much because then all of a sudden now we're losing some competitive edge. Talk to me a little bit about why seed stage and what you've seen that you think is different about what seed stage needs versus maybe pre-seed.
Yeah, and I think we learned as we went through. Once again, going back to that whole listening concept. I don't think we planned that. I think we were going, hey, we'll go super early. I think one of the things that we learned, I think there are 2 pieces. One thing that we learned is super early stage. People are just moving and changing and going so fast that it's just, there's so many pivots that it was really hard to sort of scope out an engagement. Or we learned this with some of the first companies that were our sort of guinea pigs. It's like 3 weeks in, and they're like, "Oh no, let's change and do this, or let's change and do this." And they were really small. We actually, even early on, we did, solo entrepreneurs. You know, it, we don't do that anymore. You need to have a full team, and that's not to say I'm not knocking the hustle, not knocking the game. We need that, but we think that there are other accelerators or other folk who can work with them. And so, in that concept, it's sort of the difference between being a startup and a company. So, I think, Dominic, we're trying to bridge that sort of inflection point and go a little bit more into the company. And I think the definition of the way I think of it is startups are searching. They're searching for product market fit. They're trying different things. They're trying to get traction then, so they can go. Once they figure that out, the game's not over. You still need to execute, you need to implement, you need to grow, and you need to scale. And so we're more at that, hey, past ideation, you know what you're doing. Now you're wanting to grow into other markets, or you're trying to bring in other revenue streams, you're trying to sort of nail down your pricing or do things like that. And that's the type of stuff that BCG does for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and that just makes it easier for them to transfer as well. Like they've done it for a big company, now they just do it on on a smaller sort of micro scale, and it it translates for the early stage startups. Yeah, we tried it and we did it, and we were like, you know what, this doesn't work. BCG can't add as much value because it's sort of a moving target. Once we can say this is the target, here's what you need to do. I mean, they go and they crush it.
And this is something, I mean, like we talked about this a lot, right? Because I know I work with a lot of founders that are seed stage and above. And it's just like this narrative that we have that all Black founders, they're making cupcakes in their kitchen and they're all doing small businesses and they're not doing tech. But what we find out is like that's actually not even true, right? We have tons of energy companies, hot tech companies, product companies that are doing massive, dollars in revenue, or they've raised a seed or even an A round, that we're just not sharing those stories of success and supporting those folks to grow, because we're hyper focused on this narrative of kind of, we do want to support that other segment, but also this narrative of kind of lack, that we don't have all these things and all these resources, so we can't grow and do these things. But actually we have folks who are doing it against all odds, right? And we want to make sure we support them as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And don't knock cupcakes. I love cupcakes. We've had at least two cupcake companies, Sharonda Cupcake Therapy and the ladies that whipped Urban Dessert Lab. And they actually pivoted. And so they were doing cupcakes, and then they're doing vegan ice cream, and they're killing it with the vegan ice cream. So we love it. But you're right. That's the other piece in here is we're industry agnostic, and we have both I would say sort of a Wall Street and a Main Street
Mhm.
sort of flavor. So we do sort of mom and pop plus one or two or three sort of growth that aren't necessarily tech, but we're also pulling companies out of MIT and Harvard and Babson and different places that do have a real big tech focus.
And so you guys are doing something that's, I think, particularly unique, separate of even BCG, which is already a unique partnership. And particularly because it wasn't, again, I think that we look at the McKinseys today and so on, they're doing amazing programs. I know a lot of Samsung, T-Mobile, all these different folks doing programs. It was really, the impetus was really them inside the organization, right? This was a little bit different. This was really you bringing an idea to BCG and having them adopt that and partner with you on that idea. But the other thing that you do that's really unique is that you actually have paid executive coaches, leadership coaches, and paid business coaches. Most accelerators, like 99%, only have mentors, volunteer mentors, right? So talk with me about the decision for why you went that route, in terms of like having those two kinds of folks, and then also why you think they should be paid.
Yeah, I think there's one. I think it came about of, and we didn't sort of talk about sort of the growth and explosion of sort of the Majora project. What happened is, maybe I'll explain that, and that sort of gets to that piece. So we started in 2016 with 6 companies, and then I think we did 8 the next year. And we're like, whoa, that's too many. Yeah, I had 2 partners at Masada, and so we were sort of doing, in addition to the consulting that BCG was doing, and when we did multiple iterations of what that looked like. Right now, it sort of ends up being, let's say, on average, like 5 to 8
Mhm.
consultants from BCG working. But what we realize is a number of these companies, especially the earlier stage, some of them they didn't know what big three strategy consulting firms were or how to
Right.
leverage what they had. And so what we would do is sort of my partners and I, we would just do it. And I did the bulk of it. And so I would just meet with the companies and say, well, what's going on? Do you have any questions? Can I help you think about what's going on, there? And so we did that for like 4 years. And then in 2020, the pandemic hit. And so when the pandemic hit, we were like, all right, do we shut this down? What's going, because this was all in person.
Right.
All of these things were in person. All the companies in Boston would go meet at BCG's office. They moved to the Seaport now, but I think they were on like State Street or Congress, at that intersection of State and Congress. At the beginning, they would actually go over and have meetings and meet with people, or just do some things via phone from time to time. But when the pandemic hit, we went Zoom, and then when we went Zoom, we were like, hey, we're not restricted to Boston. If we're not going to be in person, we can be wherever. And then on the heels of the pandemic, right there was, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, I can sort of go on and on. So there was a lot of, I'll just say it, what I would call white guilt, literally and figuratively. And people were trying to figure out what to do. And so it actually was sort of, while we had these sort of, dual crises going on, it's sort of that whole idea of don't waste the crisis. Um, BCG leaned in,
Mhm.
and we expanded, and we added a few more cities. I think we added New York and Detroit and Chicago, and I think it was Houston or Dallas, or sort of a combined sort of Texas piece. And so we went from just people in Boston to now we're in like 5 cities. And so now, as we think about this 8th cohort, and applications are open now, I'll need to drop, the
Yep.
it's just www.majiraproject.org. You can just apply there. So we moved from, just to give you a sense, we moved from 6 companies, 1 BCG office, a couple of dozen BCG volunteers in 2016 to last year. We had over 30 companies. We were in close to 16 BCG offices, and we had more than 400 BCG volunteers. So it didn't happen right away, but we added cities because I think, like you said, Dominique, um, I think BCG has been able to evolve with us, and they learned, and they were like, "Hey,
Mhm.
this works." And
Yep.
as more people are doing it, they're talking, actually, that's one thing I'll add to this. At the beginning, I was like, "This is a win-win-win." It was a win for Masada because this
Mhm.
really grew out of Masada Partners. This was the way for us to do this work. In a sense, it was a pro bono arm of
Mhm.
Masada Partners, actually up until just a few years ago. So
Yeah.
it wasn't even a formal nonprofit. We became a formal nonprofit Juneteenth of 2020. And so we'll be 3 years. Actually, I guess we just turned 3
Yeah.
this past, Juneteenth. So I think they learned, and as people heard it, and I would be places. I was at MIT at a graduation thing like a couple years ago, and I was meeting with some students, and she was saying she was going to some BCG office, and she said, yeah, and get to work on the Majira project. I was like, yeah, that's cool. So it's even
Mhm.
what we realize is it's a win for us. It's a win for the companies because they're getting pro bono consulting from BCG, but also from, well, at the time it was Masada. Now it's Majira, because
Mhm.
we've got some people to be a little bit more on the ground in a sense. But I think the biggest winners are actually the consultants and associates and people at BCG, because oftentimes, because we're not. So let me preface: we're not getting managing directors and partners working with these companies in most cases. It's typically consultants. You might get some, project managers, principals, and we have had partners at time, but that's rare. I think they will come in and be involved, but this is oftentimes some of the more junior folk. But those are the folk who are doing the work most of the time anyway. If you think
Right.
of investment banks and consulting practices, and so they're actually getting to do a little bit, more client facing and things of that nature and getting to see. But I think there's a cultural piece too, because
Mhm.
BCG is not, I don't know all their diversity statistics, and I know they push and do different things, but these teams are not all black and brown consultants. There
Right.
are others, and I think what we're doing is they're learning, they're getting to interact, especially in this climate that we're in today. They're
Mhm.
getting to see entrepreneurs who are people of color doing amazing work. And remember, these folk are, some of them are going to become, MDPs, at
Mhm.
BCG, but a lot of them are going to go and work in corporate and be in the C-suite. A lot
Yeah.
of them are going to go and start venture capital funds
Mhm.
or do their own startups. And so I think we're helping them as well,
Mhm.
and I think they're getting a lot out of it. And that's why I think it's actually grown
Mhm.
within BCG, because it's valuable to them as well.
Mhm. And so, yeah, I think thank you for sharing that. And so I want to double back a little bit. I think you kind of shared a little bit of the story of Majira and kind of how you got to where you guys are now, but then kind of add that layer in for me about the coaching in terms of the executive leadership and the business coaches and kind of why they are supplemental, why you added them in. And then like also kind of the decision to pay, because I think most programs run on mostly volunteers.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing me back. I went off on a tangent, but yes, on the business coach. So that was it. So I told that story to go, hey, when it was 6 companies, I could handle it and I could check in with them. When it's 30 companies, I
Yeah.
can't do that, and it's pro bono and it's on the side. So I was like, I don't have time. So it wasn't just this idea of like feeding into him and giving thing. It was also we needed to make sure that they were doing all right. And typically, we ask 3 questions, and this is all the business coaches in a sense are doing. Is one, we ask, how are you doing? So we
Mhm.
try to focus on the well-being of the entrepreneur, their mental health, all of that stuff, just to check on them first. And then we're like, how's it going? And how's it going with the company? So you can be sort of an ambassador and help them think about stuff, but also is how's it going with the BCG teams? So we've learned, we've had it on both sides. BCG teams are, they have paid clients. And so we know that the paid clients come first. And so
Mhm.
this is done in what they call their magic time. And
Mhm.
so every now and again, maybe the team was staffed the wrong way and everybody got sucked into something, and
Mhm.
so they got ghosted. And so if we didn't have somebody checking in, the entrepreneurs might go, hey, you know what, I'm not going to make a fuss, this is not paid. It's sort of that, I'm from Alabama, don't look a gift horse in the mouth,
Yeah.
like, hey, this is free. I and so when we have somebody checking in, we're like, no, that's not what this is. You are the client. Let us work with our contacts at BCG and we'll fix it. And we do the same thing. We've had, sometimes an entrepreneur will go missing. And we've learned, right around sort of Black Friday and sort of that Thanksgiving time, especially the retail companies, we've recognized over the last few years, to make sure we manage that, because they get sort of bombarded, and we try to make sure but we've learned that, and learn how to track folk down and do that piece. So I think it's not just them sort of giving some, okay, I think this, I think that.
Mhm.
We wanted them to really be checking in, and if there are issues, get back to us. And so I think the paid piece is one, from an accountability piece, and also the other piece is there's too much stuff, I think, especially in the black and brown space, that's extractive. That
Yeah.
there's a black tax. that I'll say that is out there. And one of the things that we tried to do, and it's not always, but I tried to have a lot of, black and brown coaches, and we try to curate and mix them. But even if they're not, because all of our coaches aren't, we have, white guys, white women, you know, you know, Asian, Indian, we sort of have everybody. Um, I think it's people value a little bit more what they pay for,
Mhm.
or what they're getting paid to do. And so that's that piece. And then on the other side of the business coaches, and this is, I think, one of the really great learnings that we've got is the leadership coaching has been amazing. And we haven't given everybody a leadership coach because we haven't had the funding. Actually, BCG, in addition to all the pro bono work that they do, they actually give us funding to support the business coaches. So they do that. We actually do the executive leadership coaches ourselves on the Majura side, and so we've just been piloting and typically doing it with women of color. Founders. We've had others, but we started there because of that sort of intersectionality. And what we realize is, that's very different. They may be doing some type of assessment. There's a lot of, like, really, they have sort of their piece that they do. You can't ask somebody to do that for free. That is too much work to do, over like a 4 or 5 month period, sort of checking in, a couple times a month, 30 minutes or an hour at times. So we wanted to give them, and we still don't think we're giving them enough. We're giving them a stipend
Mhm.
to sort of cover some of their costs and cover their time. And we've definitely have had some people, a number of the coaches that I've tapped, because we've just sort of done it organically. Some of my Sloan classmates, and some of them were like, no, we don't, you don't have to pay me. We still pay them. And we're like, hey, you can give it back to us if you want. We're a nonprofit. So
Yeah.
we'll take it back if you want to give it back to us. But we want to value your time.
So we did have a question from the chat. So someone asked, are the check-ins only with startups? Are the same questions asked to mentors and to the paid coaches?
Hmm. So we don't do we actually have check-ins with the coaches. So we do that on a monthly period. We share lessons learned and best practices. Kimberly Wei Chang is our director of operations. She's actually was out on maternity leave, and she's moving on to another role in product management. But she did a really good job the last couple of years, helping us to really structure the business coaching and the leadership coaching. And I will give a shout out. I've been a consultant here in Boston for the Social Innovation Forum, and so it is a program that works with what they call social innovators, or EDs of nonprofits. And so, in doing that consulting work, they actually, after the consulting piece, they actually bring on executive coaches. So I got to meet a handful of these executive leadership coaches as I transitioned some of my social innovators, and in doing so, got to see what they were doing and how they supported these nonprofit leaders. And I was like, all this stuff needs to happen with these for-profit leaders too. They need this work. So actually, our first crop, or the first handful of coaches, I just grabbed some of those folk who were doing it on the nonprofit side and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this with some for-profit startups?" And they said yes, and they've actually helped us to craft it and go, "Hey, what is leadership coaching? Hey, this is not therapy. It is coaching. It is this, and it should look like this, and this is how it should feel." And so this has all been an iterative process, but we do check in, and the engineer in me is all about continuous improvement and feedback, and really just refining all of the programs.
And so I think, you talk a lot about, and I think through so far in the conversation, you've talked a lot about kind of the different things you've been involved in. And and kind of the questions that you're asking when you meet with companies. So, I'm going to say very loudly and proudly, which I think you'll agree, is that you are a relationship guy. I think that is really kind of, a core tenet of kind of your belief in your approach. And so, can you just talk with me about, and also I'd maybe say it's also what makes a great MD or executive director in general. We see across most accelerators that the strongest accelerators have the best network that the executive director can deploy and provide access to for their companies. And I think you are the king of relationships and have millions of them, in a sense. So I would love to kind of get, if you could talk with me about the power of relationships and why you spend so much time cultivating them.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to be, you know, relational versus transactional. And there are places where it's transactional and things like that. But I think in this space, this innovation and entrepreneurship space, I think it's really about relationships, and you never know, how things are going to happen. Like I said, my personal relationship with Roger, it's sort of what led to this. We're hanging out watching a football game. I'm telling him sort of my concerns and issues, and we're like, we got this pilot. 7 years later, this thing is growing. I just talked about Kimberly, and Kimberly came to me because of a relationship I have with. I don't know if you know Lucas, Lucas Turner Owens, and Lucas was here doing work, and I got to know Lucas, and we would stay in touch and still stay in touch. And Lucas sent Kimberly my way. She was talking to him about things, and she actually shadowed me for a little bit, and then we actually brought in funding actually through one of our cohort alumni, Marcus Wilson at Noble. They they're one of those companies that actually has money to pay BCG to consulting fees, and so they actually gave us back a huge chunk of funding early on that allowed us to grow this program and to do that work. And so I think that's super important. And even as we think about the entrepreneurs in the program, I sort of think the partnership between Majura and BCG, we think about sort of the jockey and the horse
Mm.
sort of approach. And so I think they're working on the business, for the most part. BCG is, like I said, it's a strategy project or sales and marketing or operations. They're thinking about something to grow the business. But what we're doing is thinking about the entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs, businesses come and go. Entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, and they hustle and they do different things. And I'll say that I learned this through the MIT Venture Mentoring Service. It's team mentoring, but the focus is to support that student, or undergraduate or graduate student or postdoc or faculty or alum person. Support them. Don't worry as much about the company. Yeah, we'll give feedback on that, but we do that. So I think that's the sweet spot here is we can do that. And I'll turn this on you, Dominique. Perfect example. You came through this program with all yoga pants and Aubrey, and you do. So you're a hustler, you're an entrepreneur. And so I support you not just through the Majura project, but through, you've supported Masada. You're actually helping us now with Majura, the growth founders, all the different things that you're doing. It's about your company. This would have come on a long time ago.
No, and I think you're right about that, and I think that's something that I think you've done amazingly well. And I think a lot of folks kind of say what you say, but they don't necessarily do what you do, right? And so I think, and I say that in the sense of there's a lot of founders who are part of groups and communities and accelerators where, yeah, you know what, they were in the program, they connected with folks, but if they don't reach out to that MD or if they don't follow up in a month or 2 or 6 months, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? And so I think you've done a really good job of keeping in touch with folks, checking in with folks, even at an alumni level, that I think is pretty unheard of across the space. And I think it just speaks to like the deep commitment to the work and the people, right? Not just the company, which I think gets lost a lot in kind of startup land and kind of all the cover of growth and all these different things, and adding value, and if it's worth my time and all these things, and not understanding that like life is long. People have many iterations. They go through many journeys. And so just because it might not be the now moment doesn't mean it's not um, a time or space to cultivate relationship for the long term, right? I think you speak to that a lot, and I think with that, I want to pivot into the future of Madeira, which is really kind of also really important for this call. And so we've been working for a couple of months with you, on the strategy, and I think maybe at the highest level, and we'll ask a couple more questions about this, and then again, folks, if you have questions, please jump in here. But looking ahead, like what are your aspirations and goals for the future with Majira? Also, given everything else that you're doing, and and kind of the initiatives that you're involved with. How do you see this fitting in, and kind of what do you want to see it become?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One, just going back to that sort of origin story, this came from wanting to help. And I think that goes back to what you were saying before. I think one of our values at Majira is we care. And we really care. I care about the black and brown community. I want them to succeed. And so because of that, we're going to do everything that we can do and leverage the resources that we have to do that work. So in terms of thinking about growth, this was all organic. It went from sort of pro bono, arm of my consulting practice to, a 501c3. Actually, we were our fiscal agent. So Melissa Bradley at 1863 Ventures, she
Yeah.
was our fiscal agent up until earlier this year. So, shout out to Melissa for helping us along the way, because we were like, okay, we need to do this. How do we bring in funds? We're not set up fully. We don't have the IRS side of this. So now we're, full fledged, 501c3. But that's relationships. That's I met Melissa 5-6 years ago, maybe, on Martha's Vineyard at Crystal Johnson's event. And Crystal, I met through, um, you know,
Mosaic.
through Mosaic Genius, but I got to Mosaic Genius through being on the board of the Black Alumni of MIT. And Chris Rose, Dr. Chris Rose, who's a professor at Brown, his wife is in the philanthropy space. And we were at a barbecue, and she was like, I was telling her some of the things I was thinking. She was like, you need to come to Crystal's event. And so once again, it's all these relationship pieces that make things happen. But pretty much to answer your question, actually, I want to formalize this in a sense, almost like what we were saying with the companies. We were a startup. We even though it's 7 years, it's really the last 3 years, sort of post pandemic, when this thing blew up. And so I think we're trying to move out of the startup phase to be more operational and sustainable and all that. Because what I'm realizing is I can't do all that alumni follow up if I'm paying coaches. If I'm doing, like, if we don't have the infrastructure to do the things, because we've done this on a really shoestring budget, and just we've been operating like we're still the pro bono arm of my consulting practice. So really excited to, like, stop like after 7 years and go, hey, let's do an assessment. And so thank you, and Simone, for helping us do that. And next, actually bringing on some people to help, because I can't do it by myself. So really happy that another farmer alum, Khadija Robinson, is coming on as a right now as a part-time COO to really help pull this stuff together. And if you don't know Khadija, she's amazing. I can't remember where Khadija did undergrad. I think Howard or Hampton, but she did Harvard Law School. But she started a company called Analyst to really aggregate Black and Brown businesses. And her company was acquired by Diddy. And so she got acquired, and then she ran his piece. And I saw a post that she said, "Hey, I'm leaving. I'm going to take some time and figure out what's next." And I was like, oh, this is perfect. I was like, let me call Khadijah. She'd be great. Because the other thing is, I'm on the other side of 50,
Yeah.
and I like doing the work. I'm not great at telling people about it. And,
Mhm.
just saying, so it's great that we're doing this, but I'm just trying to do the work. And so I think, thinking more of a social media presence, of telling the amazing stories of what our entrepreneurs are doing and the things that are happening with them. I think there's a huge opportunity to do
Mhm.
that right now, and we've got really, really good bones, because like you said, we've been doing this for a long time.
Mhm.
And so we just now, if I can put the operational thing. So that's what I want to do. I'm looking at, how can I eventually move out and really be just more chair of the board. And
Yeah.
that other piece, when I talked about Malika, leaning more into the funding side of it, because
Mhm.
that's a piece that I look at now is, sort of like that, I, could have had a V8, if we had invested in these companies
Mhm.
way back when, we'd be making we could actually sustain the program probably now from doing that, because
Yeah.
if we look, we haven't gotten the last sort of survey back, but I would imagine that our companies have raised, you know somewhere in the 750 million, or close to $1 billion, uh,
Mhm.
that they've raised. And definitely generate, because we work with over 100, and we work with 128 companies
Yeah.
through those first seven accelerators. I know they've created at least 1,000 jobs, probably closer to 2,000 jobs, if not more. And so, you know, there's sort of a lot of impact in that scale.
Yeah.
And we haven't done as good a job of connecting them collectively as well. So we're trying to do more of that. And I think with some additional staff, we can do that in a more sustainable way to really unlock all the value that's in the sort of community part of the cohort.
No, for sure. And I think we have another question in the group, and I have maybe two more questions to close us out here. But so the question was, in addition to honing the skills and resilience of the entrepreneur, what else do you try to pay close attention to when it comes to the impact Majira Project fosters and the ecosystem it operates in?
Yeah, so I think there's a piece that so helping out the entrepreneurs and supporting them, but also how are we supporting the community. So if we think about sort of our overall vision and mission, so we're trying to close the racial wealth gap. And we, what I always tell when we open up is, I say, I think there are three ways to do that. One is education. Education, however, is a long play, and that is not necessarily my forte. I think next, after education, is home ownership. And so, and I've done a little bit. I used to do brownfield development, so I know real estate developers, and I know enough to be dangerous, but that's not really, you know, where it is, and there are other people who do that. Where we're working is in the entrepreneurship space, and so we think of, really, this is really community development through entrepreneurship. And so we think if we can support, and I will admit, we're sort of skimming the cream, and going with the later stage companies, but we're going now, if we can help them, they can help a lot of others, because we
Mhm.
think that Black and brown entrepreneurs oftentimes tend to hire more Black and brown folks. So from a workforce development piece, there's that. But if we can make them millionaires, and hopefully there's some unicorns, and we can make a billionaire or two out of this, they give back in their communities. They give back to their faith organizations. They tithe at their churches or do it. But the other piece is, they fund people running for campaigns, and all of that stuff is super important. And I think that's, so we try to foster that piece too, that this is
Mhm.
not the reason we're doing it is not to make individuals like uber wealthy.
Mhm.
We say that this is community development through entrepreneurship. So we believe that these entrepreneurs sort of have an obligation to give back, and I think that's a piece that we do too, is try to look at that. And this is we didn't talk about this, Dominique, but we are no fee, no equity. But in our memorandum of agreement or understanding, we ask that the entrepreneurs consider, giving back their time, their talent, their treasure. And
Yeah.
so once they make it, you know, don't forget about a brother. Come back. And we always, before they have the money, we have them come back in to speak. So it's a
Yeah.
lot easier for us to have panels because now we got like 128 companies that have gone through the program, so we
Yeah.
can go find people to be a part of programs. And it's also an opportunity to connect them with other people who are coming through the program. So as this new cohort comes, we can get them to go, oh, you know what, you should go talk to this company because they've done that, or they. And so we're building that piece. And so I think, Dominique, the biggest piece is codifying all of that infrastructure. A lot of it has
Mhm.
been in my head. And so how we now, we use HubSpot as our CRM. And so even, I'll even go there. So the relationship piece of that.
Mm.
Mark Roberge and Mike Volpe, who were what were they, the VP of sales and marketing at HubSpot when it IPO'd, are actually friends. I know them. They've come in and spoken, to the cohort. They've supported, spoken to companies. They've got, Mark has a fund. I've introduced him to people.
Yeah.
Volpe was one of the first investors, not investors, donors to the Majira project. So those are the
Mm.
types of, things going back to the relationship. But we really want to just operationalize and codify this thing, so it can just continue, and also so it's not about me. I can sort of, move out and actually have more of those one-on-one conversations with alumni. That's what I really love to do,
Mhm.
versus doing all the operation stuff.
Yes, that is 100% accurate, Kerry. Yes, your relationship, and yes, and Khadijah will be amazing. And also shout out to Simone Seymour, who supported a lot of the work with the strategic planning for Majira. To your point, really for codification for sustainability, and then looking at growth in the future. I think is what our strategy was, and I think the plan has come out beautifully and brilliantly in terms of what's really needed to do the work really well and really deeply. I think you've done amazing work as an individual. But that can be taxing. And there's, and to your point, you're moving to a kind of a new season. The organization is growing up and really needs some more formality as the engagements are growing and getting more complex. The companies are getting bigger. There's more BCG engagement. There's more partner engagement. And so it just is requiring kind of a fresh kind of coat of paint in a sense to really kind of take it to the next stage. And so kind of we have one more question here before we close out, which is, in each of the cities that Majira operates in, is there any collaboration with higher ed institutions in those cities?
I would say there probably is, but it hasn't been intentional. So, so I think, that is probably something as we sort of think about, having somebody thinking about, partnerships, really sort of doing that. And one of the things that we did do, good question in the sense of the cities where we are and where we've typically grown, and even sort of the entrepreneurship innovation ecosystem. Usually where we are, there's a large Black or brown population. There's typically a BCG office, and there typically is an academic institution there. And so we probably have not done the best job of fully tapping that. I think it's happened organically, to a sense, with some of the speakers and people that we brought in and some of the things that we've done. So, myself being a dual MIT alum, clearly there's a strong MIT influence, but I don't know if we've done anything, formally with any of the programs, there, with the Majura project proper. But I know some of the, actually, and I'll have to call out Walter Diaz. He's the point person, on the BCG side. And so he's a Harvard and HBS guy. I know some of the folk coming out of the program have also, matriculated into programs at HBS, at Harvard. And so we've done that. I don't know if it's formal, but I do think it's something as we think about moving forward, and have more sort of program managers on the ground or community managers, that we can actually go and do that, so we can sort of replicate sort of what we've done in Boston. So I think we've done it in Boston, but haven't formalized it. But I think there definitely is an opportunity to do it in
Yeah.
Atlanta, in Dallas, and Houston, and San Francisco, and Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, Seattle, all of these other places where we are.
Yeah, I think, and this I think speaks to the partnership play that we talked about a lot around the next iteration of Majira, getting some ground game going to build into relationships and partnerships to support companies where they are, and that the virtual connection of network of BCG is amazing, but they also having that balance of what's happening in my kind of regional or local ecosystem to support the business is also really important. And part of the strategy for sustainability and for growth is starting to build more depth of resource and network in those areas, I think. So that to me is going to be hugely powerful for these companies, and additive to Jira. Okay, so last closing question here for Kerry. So you are from Alabama. So tell me, do you consider yourself an Alabamian or a Bostonian, since you've been in Boston now for 20 years or
Oh
so?
man, you didn't tell me you were going to ask this one. No, I'm torn. I'm always, you can take uh, the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. I'm always going to be a Southerner, and I always have that, and that's going to be there. But I think it was a number of years back that the balance flipped to I've lived more in Boston than anywhere else, and my wife's a Harvard person. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be in Boston. I know that, and so that's why I also think that I leaned in to a
Mhm.
lot of these things here, because I knew I was going to be rooted here, and so
Mhm.
that allows me to do things. So I am and actually. Mayor Curtatone would say I'm a villain. I'm actually from Somerville, I live in Somerville, just north of Boston. But
Right.
like the whole greater Boston metro area is such an amazing place. There's just
Yeah.
so much stuff that's going on. There's so much history. There's so
Mhm.
much culture. There's so much innovation and entrepreneurship that it'd be tough to leave. So I am a Bostonian now, but I was born and bred in Bama.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. And being from New England myself, I can attest to that. Boston, it's hard to beat Boston for the research and the intellectual capital alone. Some of the smartest people in the world. And so, if you're trying to build something with smart people, if you're Black and brown, it's definitely the place to go to college and work. And then you can always go fundraise in San Francisco and New York. I tell people, but getting some good folks from Boston is always a plus, because they'll be super helpful in the journey as well. So thank you so much, Kerry. Any last words before we close out today?
No, just to say thank you, for this, and if people are interested in any of the facets of what we're doing, we're at www.majiraproject.org. If you're interested in being a coach or a mentor, what we do is I think we have a mentor piece there, and then as we get to know people and we see that it might make sense, we bring people in as coaches, because we want to curate. We want to make sure we know that it's a good fit before we do it. But if you want to sponsor, if you've
Yeah,
got
like we need a direct call out, like,
yeah,
hey, we're fundraising. If you want to sponsor or donate to Majira, if you want to be a partner, service provider partner, but if you want to, crowdsource your donation with a group of other alums, if you want to support a track, whether they're climate or retail oriented, there's tons of things that you can do to participate with Majira. They are a force. They're nationwide and growing every day. And so it's definitely, what do you call it? The hook to the cart to hook your horse to, or whatnot. I think that's whatever that term is. I don't know.
just hit your wagon to a
Hitch your
stone.
wagon to something, right? Okay, yeah, hitch your wagon to something. I think that Majira is something to hitch your wagon to and participate in and show up, in a lot of great ways. So any partner, I think, we'd love to hear from you, and through the website, as Kerry noted as well. Anything
Cool.
else? Awesome.
No, I think that's it. It's and I think the other piece, I will make one last plug. I'm an environmental engineer by training. And so um, of that 128 companies, about 20% of them were in the clean energy, climate tech, food, water. And actually, that actually led me to, remember I said I was doing two nonprofits. I launched another nonprofit called Browning the Green Space, but that really spun out of the work that I was doing at Majira, just recognizing that there's so much going in climate. So I know we're at the hour mark, so I'll leave it at that. And
Oh yeah, we'll have a whole nother call about Brian the Green Space in the future too, because that's also an accelerator, and also the work you're doing with Greentown Labs. Like, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on, right? I think that is important for people to know about, because there's new accelerators every day, and the biggest thing I tell folks is like, know what you're getting, know your purpose for joining an accelerator or program.
mhm.
Look at the MD, understand the MD's capacity, skill, knowledge, network to support your business journey. And of course, look at the resources that it also provides, because there's a lot of programs out here and they all can provide different things. It's not good or bad, but just understanding what you're supposed to get from that is a really important part of the ecosystem, because there's so many programs available now and folks are doing a lot of them. And sometimes some are moving the needle, sometimes they're not moving the needle. So we want people to hitch their cart, whatever you just said,
Hitch your wagon to a
hitch
storm.
your wagon to the right thing. So I think hitching your wagon to Majira is the right thing. And even Brian the Green Space and the work you're doing there, I think we want to talk about too.
Yeah, and as you're closing on that, I think that's the big piece too, as we listen to people. And that also goes to that funding piece, is you shouldn't have to do 7, 8, 9, 10 accelerators. Something's wrong. And so, it should be like, 3 to 5 sort of max. And then you need to begin to that execution and sort of growing phase. And so that's sort of what we're trying to work on, is, getting it right. I think we've got some things right. So, sort of, nail it a little bit before you scale it. And so I think we're sort of to that. It's not completely nailed, but it's close. So we can now start to think more about scaling it and growing it even more, and just making it more sustainable. So thank you, Dominique, and thanks to everyone who listened in.
Yes. Thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Accelerator Insider, where we talk to MDs about how they think about the future and build businesses. Have a wonderful day. There you go.